Mistress posted pics from his bed, while wife gave birth. Karma hit the millionaire. Fast Richard Harrington was the quintessential self-made millionaire, charming, confident, and so sure he could outrun the consequences of any misdeed that he never looked back. While his beloved wife, Ava, lay in a hospital bed about to deliver their first child, he was entertaining a secret mistress in the opulent master bedroom of his suburban mansion. The mistress's brazen decision to post photographs online from that very bed set off a chain reaction of scandal and heartbreak, one that would prove no amount of money could buy redemption. This is a tale of betrayal, vengeance, and ultimately the dramatic twist of fate that brought one proud man to his knees. Nestled in an exclusive neighborhood on the outskirts of Boston, the Harrington estate stood as a symbol of success. Its white columns, sprawling lawns, and manicured gardens shouted privilege and affluence. Inside lived Richard Harrington, an entrepreneur in the tech industry, known for his magnetic charm, dazzling smile, and an uncanny ability to transform every venture he touched into gold. He had grown a modest startup into a multinational firm, raking in millions and securing a spot on the local business elite's radar. Richard's wife, Ava Harrington, was the polar opposite of her flashy husband. Soft-spoken and kind-hearted, she had devoted herself to several philanthropic causes, championing mental health initiatives and volunteer work. Despite her gentle nature, Ava possessed an underlying strength that made her an anchor in turbulent times. She was the reason the Harrington name had soared in philanthropic circles with unwavering respect. Their marriage, at least from the outside, seemed like a picture-perfect union. Partners at public events, they were often photographed in high-end magazines, Richard beaming as he draped a protective arm over Ava's shoulders, and Ava smiling, her eyes brimming with the warmth of unconditional love. When news spread of Ava's pregnancy, well-wishers flocked from every corner of their social and professional spheres. People sent extravagant baby gifts and showered them with best wishes for the perfect family life. Richard, for his part, was thrilled, or so he appeared. He boasted to his friends about the legacy he would leave for his child, a future of comfort, private schooling, and opportunities beyond imagination. It was the culminating piece of his success story, a prosperous business, a mansion in a prestigious neighborhood, and now a growing family. Underneath the facade, a quiet tension brewed. Ava had given up her career in interior design at Richard's request, so she could focus on the household. She had wholeheartedly agreed, believing it was best for their burgeoning family. Still, a shadow lingered in Richard's eyes whenever the conversation touched on parenting responsibilities. The spotlight was his natural habitat, and being a father demanded a kind of self-sacrifice. Richard wasn't entirely certain he was ready to offer. Neither suspected that their relationship was on the verge of a cataclysmic shift. Ava had absolute trust in Richard, unwaveringly loyal, despite occasional bouts of jealousy from those around them. After all, a handsome millionaire in a world of sycophants and social climbers was bound to attract attention. Yet even Ava never imagined her husband's betrayal would be so brazen or so cruelly timed. Traces of what was to come rippled beneath the surface. The short, cryptic phone calls Richard took in. Private, the sudden business trips that left Ava alone for days on end. The cunning glint in Richard's eyes whenever he thought no one was watching. The stage was set. The facade they had so meticulously created would soon crumble, and neither Ava nor Richard would emerge unscathed. In the months leading up to the baby's due date, Richard's behavior began to shift from mildly distant to palpably evasive. It started with him returning home later than usual. When Ava questioned him, her face filled with concern and exhaustion from her advancing pregnancy, He'd give her carefully rehearsed explanations. The investors needed him. He had urgent meetings in London or Singapore, or there was a problem with a new product launch that required his immediate attention. Ava tried her best to be supportive, reminding herself that Richard's work had always been the lifeblood of their lavish lifestyle. She saw his success as a family blessing. But as her belly swelled and the baby kicked inside her, the house felt emptier and colder. Each night Richard stayed out. The staff, who adored Ava for her kindness, whispered among themselves about the master's unexplained absences. Housekeeper Nadia Stein would often leave a tray of tea and snacks on the kitchen island with a sympathetic smile, as if trying to comfort Ava without saying a word. Ava brushed off any nagging fears by surrounding herself with friends and charities. She coordinated a fundraiser for underprivileged children, curated a gallery event, and continued her philanthropic duties almost up until her third trimester was nearly over. To the outside world, she was the epitome of a graceful, soon-to-be mother, radiant and steadfast in her devotion to her husband. Meanwhile, Richard's phone buzzed incessantly with notifications he slyly hid from Ava. There were hushed phone calls in the study. Whenever Ava passed by, he'd pause mid-sentence and scowl at the door. Each time he'd emerge with a smile and an excuse, patting Ava's hand or belly with forced enthusiasm, as if that simple gesture could erase the tension. He grew increasingly bold with his deceptions. On one notable afternoon, Richard claimed he had to fly to San Francisco to close a deal. Instead, he spent the day in a luxurious hotel penthouse right in downtown Boston. Ava discovered his lie by accident. She received a call from a colleague of Richard's asking if she could remind him about a meeting they both had the following day in Boston, a meeting that Richard had assured Ava he was halfway across the country to attend. That evening Ava confronted him. Her hands trembled as she asked for the truth. Richard's smooth tongue danced around her suspicions, weaving a tapestry of half-lies, a last-minute change in itinerary, unconfirmed flights, unsent emails. He insisted it was all a misunderstanding, planting a gentle kiss on her forehead. He apologized profusely, swearing he would never deliberately hide anything from her. "I love you and our child," he said, placing a hand on Ava's stomach. I would never risk losing that. Ava's eyes brimmed with tears, some from relief, some from lingering doubt. She wanted so desperately to believe him. She told herself that stress could make people act strangely. After all, Richard was under tremendous pressure at work. In a moment of vulnerability, she let herself be reassured, and for a few days, their relationship returned to the warmth of old times. Little did she know the cracks would soon become gaping chasms. Another figure lurked in the shadows, someone who would exploit the very gap between Ava's innocence and Richard's arrogance. And it would be that person's brazen act that blew the entire facade wide open, shattering everything Ava held sacred. Richard's paramour was a strikingly beautiful woman named Camilla Moore. She was well known in certain exclusive social circles for her expensive tastes, sharp wit, and cold ambition. Born and raised in a family that had clawed its way from moderate comfort to borderline wealth, Camilla learned early on the art of social climbing. She lured influential men with her undeniable charm and cunning intelligence, but none provided the status and security she truly craved. Until she met Richard, they crossed paths at a high-profile charity gala. Months earlier, Camilla, draped in a designer gown, spotted Richard from across the room. His reputation preceded him a millionaire with a penchant for extravagance and an ever-expanding empire. Perhaps she also sensed that he was open to risky indulgences. In any event, she planned her approach, carefully feigning an accidental bump in the crowd. Their eyes met, and she offered him a dazzling smile, flipping her perfectly curled hair over one shoulder. It didn't take long before Richard was captivated by her flirtatious banter and charm. What began as harmless flirting soon escalated to discreet lunch dates and late-night champagne rendezvous in upscale penthouses. Richard, intoxicated by Camilla's allure, found himself drawn into her carefully woven web. He had always prided himself on his charisma, but it was Camilla who expertly manipulated the dance between them. She made him feel irresistible and adventurous, while he in turn provided her with lavish gifts, a diamond necklace here, a weekend getaway to the Caribbean there. Yet Camilla was more than a gold digger. She had carefully studied Richard's personality, his weaknesses, and particularly his ego. She knew the one thing he couldn't resist was flattery, especially from a confident, beautiful woman who also made him feel like a daring rogue. Her ultimate ambition was to secure a permanent place in his life, a position that guaranteed power protection and a never-ending stream of wealth. As Ava's belly grew, so did the secrecy of Richard's escapades. When Ava's labor due date approached, Richard had to be more cunning, often meeting Camilla under the guise of emergency business deals. He rarely let himself think about the morality of his actions. It was easy for him to compartmentalize. In one room of his mind, he was the devoted husband, eagerly awaiting fatherhood. In another, he was the bold lover, enthralled by the danger of his illicit affair. Camilla sensed that Richard's family commitments would soon take center stage. The baby's arrival loomed like an unspoken threat to the fantasy world she had so meticulously built with him. What if he decided to become the perfect father and ended their affair? What if his guilt finally caught up to him? She had invested too much to let that happen. She dropped subtle hints about wanting more, an apartment of her own, a larger monthly allowance. Each time, Richard hesitated. He wasn't quite ready to blow the cover on his marriage, not yet. This hesitation planted a seed of resentment in Camilla's heart. She had believed that her hold over him was unbreakable. The idea that he might slip away, returning wholly to Ava once the baby was born, made her blood boil. And so Camilla began plotting her own strategy, a foolproof plan to mark her territory and ensure Richard couldn't cast her aside without consequences. She decided that if Richard wouldn't leave his wife gracefully, she would force a confrontation. Little did either of them realize just how explosive that confrontation would be, or how widely it would ripple through their carefully constructed worlds. A week before Ava's scheduled delivery date, Richard suggested a brief business retreat to his team, a plausible reason for him to be away from home overnight. In reality, he planned to take Camilla on a romantic excursion to a lavish resort in Cape Cod. He justified it to himself. Soon he'd be tied up with fatherly responsibilities, so this was his last chance for freedom. It was a twisted logic that exposed his selfishness, but it was logic he clung to. Nonetheless, Camilla, elated at the prospect of a grand display of affection, paraded around the resort in designer beachwear. Together, they feasted on the finest oysters, sipped champagne under the moonlight, and indulged in a spa day at Richard's expense. Camilla made sure to snap endless pictures of her legs by the infinity pool of the decadent meals of the embroidered pillows bearing the resort's prestigious name. She was careful not to include Richard's face, but the hints were there. A second glass of champagne, a shadow cast across a pool chair, a glimpse of a broad shoulder in the corner of the frame. The staff at the resort, sworn to discretion, had seen affairs like this many times before. They recognized the dynamic immediately. An older, wealthy man accompanied by a striking younger companion. They kept their knowledge to themselves. After all, Richard tipped lavishly. Meanwhile, back at home, Ava's physical discomfort was intensifying. She felt exhausted, her feet swollen, her every nerve on edge with anticipation of the baby's arrival. Her doctor, Charlotte Greenwood, recommended rest, but Ava found it almost impossible to relax. Where was Richard? He called sporadically, offering short, rushed conversations filled with promises to be back soon. At one point, Ava could have sworn she heard the distant crash of ocean waves in the background, but Richard talked so fast she had no moment to confirm her suspicion. A sense of dread settled in Ava's chest. She found herself scrolling through social media late at night, unable to sleep. Although Camilla's profile didn't yet display any incriminating evidence, there were subtle clues, pictures from a resort that Ava knew Richard often frequented for business, a fancy meal Richard had once praised. She told herself it was just a coincidence. There was no proof, just vague, uneasy feelings swirling in her mind. By the time Richard returned, Camilla had planted the seeds of her ultimate plan. She feigned sadness at his leaving, but every kiss, every longing glance was laced with a silent promise. This isn't over. After their final night together, she whispered in his ear, "One day, I hope you'll want me here with you forever." Richard thought nothing of it. He merely smiled, took a final swig of champagne, and assured her that their secret would continue, at least for as long as it remained pleasurable and convenient for him. He left early the next morning, returning to the estate just in time to receive a tearful, relieved greeting from Ava, who clung to him in relief. Guilt prickled at Richard's conscience, but he told himself the lie. Once again, soon he would straighten things out. He couldn't know that the next time Camilla wanted to see him, she wouldn't wait for an invitation, and the consequences of her boldness would unravel his life faster than he could ever imagine. Ava went into labor 2 days earlier than expected. A sharp pain tore through her lower back, sending her into a fit of panic. She clung to the arm of the sofa, trying to stay calm as she dialed Richard's number repeatedly, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Frantic, she called their driver, Thomas Brand, who rushed her to the hospital. Nurses wheeled her into the maternity ward where Dr. Charlotte Greenwood awaited, ready to assist in the delivery. In those critical moments, Ava's world was a blur of contractions, hospital lights, and the reassuring voices of medical staff. Fear mingled with excitement. She was about to meet her baby, but amid the chaos, one distressing absence gnawed at her. Richard was nowhere to be found. He wasn't answering calls or texts, and time was slipping away. Meanwhile, Richard was at home, oblivious to Ava's frantic calls because he had placed his phone on silent mode earlier in the day. He'd invited Camilla over to finalize the last fling they both knew was long overdue to end, at least for a while. As thunderclouds gathered outside, so did the tension in the Harrington mansion. Camilla arrived in a sleek black dress and high heels that clicked on the marble floors. She carried a smug confidence, as if aware that her presence was about to shift the balance of power. While Richard paced the living room, unsure of how to break ties without sparking her fury, Camilla seized the opportunity to explore the house. She eventually wound up in the master bedroom, meticulously curated by Ava, with tasteful neutral tones and plush bedding. Camilla lounged on the bed that Ava and Richard shared, as if it was her throne. She applied a fresh coat of lipstick, snapped a few selfies, and scrolled through her camera roll with a mischievous grin. Richard found her there and attempted to usher her out, offering a half-hearted apology mixed with polite firmness. He claimed it was for the best that they take a break, especially with the baby due. Any day, fury flashed in Camilla's eyes. She realized then that he was trying to cast her aside, at least temporarily, under the guise of fatherhood obligations. It felt like a betrayal. She had dedicated months to this affair, entertaining his lavish fantasies and illusions of grandeur. Now he was pulling away. She brushed him off, focusing on her phone with renewed urgency. In an act of brazen defiance, Camilla stood up, fluffed the pillows on Ava's side of the bed, then perched herself against the headboard. She took a series of photographs, one hand on the duvet, the other poised seductively behind her head, her features illuminated by the warm glow of a bedside lamp. With a wicked smile, she uploaded them to social media with a cryptic caption: "Nothing quite like getting comfortable in the lap of luxury." She tapped post, sending digital shockwaves that would soon shatter the Harringtons' carefully cultivated facade. Within minutes, the photograph began to circulate among their shared acquaintances, who immediately recognized the distinct decor of the master bedroom. Text messages flew. Speculation ran wild. Some who had Ava's number even tried warning her, but she was deep in labor and unreachable. Camilla left the house moments later, brushing past a stunned Richard, who only then realized the magnitude of her betrayal. In a panic, he grabbed his phone, only to find dozens of missed calls and urgent messages. His heart lurched when he finally saw Ava's frantic texts about being in labor. Fear, guilt, and dread collided in his mind, and he sped to the hospital with white-knuckled terror, but the damage was done. The world now had photographic proof of his indiscretion, posted from his very own marital bed, at the exact moment Ava fought to bring their child into the world. Richard arrived at the hospital, too late, stepping into a firestorm of revelations that would consume everything he held dear. Ava's labor had been long and arduous. When she finally delivered a beautiful baby girl, tears of relief and joy mingled on her cheeks. Doctor Greenwood placed the newborn in Ava's arms, and in that euphoric moment, the entire world seemed perfect despite Richard's absence. Ava clung to the tiny bundle, pressing gentle kisses on the baby's forehead. She named her Charlotte Rose, Harrington honoring her doctor's support during the tumultuous pregnancy, and a nod to Ava's grandmother, whose middle name had been Rose Exhausted and Weak. Ava dozed in and out of consciousness after the delivery. The swirling lights of the hospital corridor seemed dreamlike. Eventually, a commotion stirred her. She blinked awake to see Richard rushing in, breathless and disheveled anxiety etched on his face. In his hands, he carried an enormous bouquet of white roses. Instead of the usual wave of love, Ava felt at his presence a sharp pain of betrayal cut through her, because in a matter of minutes, Ava's phone had pinged with messages from concerned friends, some including a screenshot of Camilla's damning social media post. She felt as though she was plunging into a cold, dark sea of disbelief. Her eyes locked on Richard's, searching for answers. But he looked away, guilt evident in the sag of his shoulders. "Where were you?" she demanded, in a trembling voice, her energy sapped but her resolve fierce. Richard set the roses down, stammering incoherently. When he saw the screenshot on Ava's phone, his face paled. He made a weak attempt to concoct a story. "It's not what it looks like," he insisted with a hollow desperation that fooled neither her nor the hospital staff within earshot. In that moment, Ava felt her world fracture. She was enveloped in emotional pain that dwarfed the physical agony of childbirth. Every fiber in her being wanted to scream, to cry, to break something, but the presence of her newborn daughter gave her a strange sense of calm resolve. She stared at Richard, her gaze a mixture of heartbreak and silent fury. The hospital staff, sensing the tension, quietly dispersed, giving them space. Ava recalled the countless nights she had worried about Richard's tardiness, the suspicious phone calls, the questionable business trips, every red flag she had ignored in her naive trust. Richard tried to salvage the situation. He apologized, swore that he loved her, claimed that Camilla's post had been a malicious stunt. "She means nothing," he said, voice quivering. "I was a fool. It's you and our daughter I love." But words were a poor shield against the torrent of betrayal. Ava demanded to know the extent of his lies. His confession dribbled out haltingly. He admitted there had been an affair that had started months ago, but he promised it had ended. Yet his presence in the house with Camilla, when Ava went into labor, told a different story. By the time Ava summoned the strength to speak, tears streamed down her face. "Get out," she whispered, her voice hoarse. She couldn't bear to look at him, nor could she let him hold the baby. "Just leave," she repeated, each word laced with heartbreak. Richard stood there, helpless, heartbreak contorting his features. But seeing no other recourse, he left the hospital room, the door swinging shut behind him with a resounding echo of finality. In the quiet that followed, Ava cradled her baby, close tears falling onto the swaddled pink blanket as she faced an unthinkable future. A marriage in tatters, trust destroyed, and the monumental responsibility of a newborn on her shoulders. The scandal hit the media and society circles like a bomb. People gossiped at country clubs. Text messages flew among the Harringtons' acquaintances, and colleagues speculated in hushed tones at Richard's firm. The humiliating photograph of Camilla in the Harringtons' bed, posted almost in real time while Ava was in labor, spread across the internet in a matter of hours. For a man who thrived on public image, this was a nightmare of epic proportions. Richard tried to contain the fallout. He hired a high-powered public relations team who urged him to issue a brief statement expressing regret for a private matter. They orchestrated a plan to spin the story, but even the best PR magic couldn't erase the visceral impact of those images. Worse, Camilla was reveling in the attention. Her cryptic social media posts continued to add fuel to the fire, each one carefully crafted to imply that she wasn't done with Richard or the limelight yet. Meanwhile, in the hospital, Ava recovered slowly. Physical exhaustion intermingled with her emotional devastation. The betrayal weighed heavily on her mind, but her newborn daughter demanded her focus. Nurses and friends stepped in to offer support. Grace Patterson, Ava's oldest friend, arrived with home-cooked meals and gentle words of encouragement. Dr. Greenwood continued to provide not just medical care but also a compassionate ear. Still, an undercurrent of rage grew within Ava. She was done being the passive, trusting wife who let her husband's schedule dictate her life. Late at night, with the baby asleep in the nursery, Ava found herself scrolling through Camilla's social media, reading every insinuating caption, every brazen comment. Each post was a knife to her heart, but it also stoked her determination to end Richard's double life once and for all. Richard tried to see Ava and the baby at the hospital multiple times. Each time she refused to meet him. Nurses turned him away on her behalf. The staff who had witnessed her tears and heartbreak offered no sympathy to the man who had abandoned his wife during labor. Finally, Richard left a handwritten letter at the reception desk, pleading for forgiveness and promising to do whatever it takes to make things right. Ava read it once and tucked it into a drawer without response. She had no intention of engaging with half-baked remorse while the stench of his betrayal still clung to her every thought. Instead, she directed her energy into planning her next steps. She needed legal advice, financial clarity, and a place to stay once she was discharged from the hospital, somewhere Richard couldn't barge in unannounced. When she arrived home a week later, it was with her friend Grace by her side. The staff welcomed her quietly, their expressions sympathetic. Richard was not there. Ava had seen to that by notifying him through their lawyer that any communication should be handled formally. Despite her heartbreak, Ava felt a flicker of empowerment. She was no longer the naive wife who chalked up red flags to stress or business obligations. She was a mother now ready to protect her child and herself at all costs. And if Richard thought he could win her back with empty promises, he was gravely mistaken. She would ensure that he and Camilla faced the full ramifications of their actions. The fallout from the scandal extended beyond personal heartbreak. Richard's company, Harrington Tech Innovations, saw its stock price wobble after negative press began to paint its founder as untrustworthy. Corporate investors grew jittery, fearing that the messy personal life of their CEO could tarnish the brand's reputation. A few key clients postponed deals, preferring to wait until the dust settled. Seeing the ripple effects, the company's board of directors convened an emergency meeting. While they couldn't remove Richard outright from his own company, they strongly advised him to step back from public appearances. The board insisted that CFO Valerie McNeil handle any interviews or press releases. Richard bristled at the suggestion, but he had little choice. The company was hemorrhaging goodwill, and his presence was only amplifying the negative spotlight. Meanwhile, Ava began taking steps to protect herself and her daughter. She hired a formidable attorney named Grace Cooper, a different Grace from her friend Grace Patterson, who specialized in high-profile divorces. Cooper was known for her ironclad confidentiality agreements and her meticulous approach to asset evaluation. Under her guidance, Ava started the process of separating her finances from Richard's freezing joint accounts and transferring her personal savings to a new bank. She also documented every piece of evidence of Richard's affair, from text messages to the infamous social media post. If Richard hoped for an amicable resolution, he would soon realize that Ava was prepared to fight. In the weeks that followed, the Harrington home became tense. Richard tried to maintain a semblance of normalcy, claiming he had a right to see his daughter Charlotte. But Ava refused to let him hold the baby unless they were in a public or supervised setting. She cited emotional distress, and her attorney backed her up. This forced visitation, stark and cold, was a rude awakening for Richard, who had assumed he could mend fences by simply showing up with expensive gifts. Camilla, on the other hand, basked in her newfound notoriety. She gave a cryptic interview to a local gossip rag, implying that Richard had promised her marriage. She boasted about the lavish gifts he had given her, though she conveniently skirted around any timeline overlaps with Ava's labor. Each headline that mentioned her name fueled her ambition. She saw a potential career boost, maybe a reality show cameo or some influencer brand deal. But in the back of her mind, she also recognized that being labeled a homewrecker could limit her rise. The public sympathy was largely with Ava. For Richard, each day felt like sinking deeper into quicksand. The pillars of his life, reputation, business, family were crumbling in slow motion. The stress was eating away at him. He barely slept and suffered from nightmares. Flashy nights with Camilla were replaced by lonely evenings in a penthouse he rented to avoid confrontation with Ava. The place felt hollow, filled with silent echoes of everything he had lost. Ava, too, was plagued by sleepless nights, though her exhaustion came from balancing the demands of motherhood legal battles and a wounded heart. Every time she looked at baby Charlotte, she felt a surge of protective ferocity. She won't grow up in a broken home filled with lies, Ava resolved. If Richard wanted to be involved, it would be on Ava's terms, honest, respectful, and stable. In the midst of all this, a quiet storm gathered. A rumor circulated that Camilla had been spotted meeting with an investigative reporter. Evidently, she was poised to share more intimate details about her trysts with Richard. For the right price, of course. Ava didn't know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. But she did know one thing. No matter how dark, the path she would walk it, bravely carrying her daughter in her arms, and an unyielding sense of justice in her heart. A few weeks after Ava returned home, the tension finally boiled over into a confrontation that had been brewing since the night the scandal broke. Under pressure from the public, the media and both of their lawyers, Ava and Richard, agreed to meet in a neutral location, an upscale mediation center in downtown Boston. The center was equipped with private rooms and security detail to ensure discretion for high-profile clients. Ava arrived first, accompanied by her attorney, Grace Cooper. She looked composed, wearing a simple black dress and a determined expression. She held a small folder of documents that outlined her terms for separation, child custody, and asset division. Richard walked in moments later, dressed in a tailored suit that hung a bit more loosely than it once did. He'd lost weight from stress. He appeared exhausted, shadows under his eyes betraying restless nights. His own lawyer, Thomas Caldwell, followed him. The tension in the reception area was palpable, and the staff quickly ushered them to a private conference room, sitting across a polished mahogany table. Neither Ava nor Richard spoke initially. Their attorneys began the formalities, discussing the potential financial settlement and custody arrangement. Richard's lawyer proposed limited spousal support and joint custody. Grace Cooper countered with a demand for full physical custody for Ava, plus a significant monthly child support payment to ensure Charlotte's well-being. Throughout the exchange, Ava barely glanced at Richard. She was determined not to let sentiment cloud her judgment. At one point, Richard leaned forward, frustration tightening his voice. "Ava, please," he said, pushing aside his lawyer's attempts to silence him. "We can settle this without dragging it out. I want to be part of Charlotte's life." Ava's eyes flashed with anger. "You chose where you wanted to be when she came into this world," she said quietly, her words slicing through the room. "I'm done bending over backward for your convenience." Grace Cooper calmly resumed negotiations, citing the damaging evidence of Richard's affair, including the exact timestamp of Camilla's post. She highlighted the emotional distress inflicted on Ava. In response, Caldwell tried to minimize Camilla's role, characterizing her as an opportunist who had manipulated Richard. But everyone in that room knew the affair was not an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of dishonesty. The dialogue continued in circles for over 2 hours, neither side willing to budge substantially. Finally, the mediator stepped in to propose a temporary agreement. Richard would have supervised visitation, and he'd provide a lump sum payment for Ava to secure an independent residence. This arrangement was to remain in effect until the divorce proceedings were finalized. Richard reluctantly agreed. Ava remained stone-faced, but inside she felt a shred of satisfaction. It was a small step, but it gave her the power she needed to safeguard her daughter's future. As they were leaving, Ava paused to face Richard, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you truly want to be a father," she said, "start by taking responsibility for the damage you've done. No more lies." Before Richard could respond, she walked out, the weight of her words lingering in the quiet hallway. In that fleeting moment, Richard sensed how dramatically the balance of power had shifted. The adoring, gentle wife who used to melt at his apologies was gone, replaced by a resolute woman who demanded respect. Yet the confrontation was far from over. Outside the mediation center, paparazzi snapped photos from behind barricades, capturing the grim faces of both parties. And across town, Camilla was busy preparing her own spectacle, one that would propel the scandal into a fresh wave of media frenzy, ensuring that neither Ava nor Richard would find peace anytime soon. Camilla's anticipated media splash arrived one crisp afternoon when she appeared on a popular daytime talk show. Under theatrical stage lights, she sauntered onto the set wearing a modest outfit, a calculated move to appear sympathetic. The audience buzzed with anticipation. The show's host, a seasoned interviewer named Yolanda Reed, wasted no time cutting to the heart of the controversy. Camilla painted herself as a misunderstood woman who had fallen for Richard Harrington's promises of a future together. She recounted tearful anecdotes of how she had tried to end the affair only to be lured back by Richard's gifts and assurances, while some audience members might have been swayed by her crocodile tears. The televised confession turned into a blazing inferno of revelations. Camilla hinted that Richard had confided in her about business decisions, even suggesting insider knowledge that could put him in hot water legally. The broadcast sent Harrington Tech Innovations into a tailspin. The board demanded an urgent meeting with Richard, who was forced to address Camilla's allegations head-on. He vehemently denied any illegal activities, but the mere suggestion cast a dark cloud of suspicion over him and his firm. An internal investigation was launched to ensure compliance with financial regulations. Each day brought new headlines, further eroding public trust in the once-admired mogul. Meanwhile, Ava watched Camilla's interview from her new apartment, a cozy space she had found with the help of Grace Cooper. A swirl of emotions engulfed her: anger, disdain, and a surprising tinge of pity. Regardless of Camilla's manipulations, the root cause of this disaster was Richard's betrayal. Camilla had simply capitalized on his weakness. Ava reminded herself that her priority was Charlotte, not the public spectacle. Behind the scenes, the divorce proceedings advanced at a grueling pace. Richard's legal team scrambled to shield him from the growing list of allegations which now included potential business malpractice. They attempted to negotiate a quick settlement to keep Richard's name out of court, but Ava's attorney was in no rush. The negative publicity only bolstered Ava's position for custody and a significant financial settlement. The more Richard's reputation tanked, the stronger Ava's leverage became. Their next court appearance was set for a preliminary hearing regarding child support and visitation. Reporters lined the courthouse steps, eager to capture the drama. Ava arrived in a conservative pantsuit, her expression resolute, while Richard seemed almost haggard in a dark grey suit. Shoulders stooped under the weight of scandal. Inside the courtroom, Grace Cooper presented an extensive dossier detailing Richard's assets, business ventures, and lavish spending on Camilla. She argued that Charlotte deserved financial security, commensurate with her father's resources, as well as stable living arrangements, free from the chaos of her father's affairs. Richard's lawyer tried to protest, claiming the affair was a personal matter, irrelevant to child support. However, the presiding judge seemed unconvinced by such a narrow interpretation, remarking that the moral fitness of a parent could be a consideration in custody matters. By the end of the hearing, Ava was granted sole temporary custody, with Richard given only limited supervised visitation. Additionally, a substantial child support figure was put in place immediately. Richard left the courthouse as cameras flashed his expression, a defeated blend of frustration and regret. On the drive back to her apartment, Ava stared out the window at the busy city streets. She felt an odd mixture of relief and sorrow. The man she had once adored was unraveling before her eyes. Yet for all the pain he had caused, she remembered the good times, the love that had once been real, or so she believed. But life offered no rewind button, and the only direction forward was through the storm. No matter how brutal, the wind's weeks turned into months, and the Harrington scandal continued to make occasional headlines. But as the public's attention drifted to newer controversies, the story's intensity gradually waned. Camilla, having enjoyed her 15 minutes of fame, tried to parlay it into a reality TV deal which fell through. Potential sponsors and producers viewed her as too polarizing. She was neither sympathetic enough to be a victim, nor villainous enough to be a captivating star. In the end, she found herself with nothing but a tarnished reputation and dwindling fortunes. Richard found little solace in the quieting storm. The reputation of Harrington Tech Innovations had taken a blow from which it struggled to recover, despite the board's best efforts. Investor confidence was shaken, and internal morale sank. Employees whispered about their fallen hero, the man who once seemed invincible, but now appeared fragile and deeply flawed. Richard's position within the company became more and more ceremonial. Valerie McNeil effectively took the reins, and rumors circulated that it was only a matter of time before Richard was fully bought out or forced to step down. For Ava, life settled into a new normal. She immersed herself in motherhood, cherishing every milestone baby Charlotte reached, from her first smile to her first gurgling attempt at laughter. The nights were long and the responsibilities immense, but Ava found herself buoyed by the unconditional love that flowed between her and her daughter, Grace Patterson, her close friend, and Nadia Stein, the former housekeeper who stayed loyal to Ava, provided constant support. The divorce proceeded steadily toward a final settlement, with Grace Cooper masterfully steering negotiations. Ava's strength and composure throughout the process earned her the admiration of many who had once only known her as Richard Harrington's wife. She began receiving invitations to speak at charity events sometimes, on the topics of betrayal and rebuilding one's life, though it still stung to relive her trauma. Ava found a sense of purpose in guiding others through difficult times. One late afternoon, as the sun painted her apartment walls with soft orange hues, a doorbell rang. Ava opened the door to find Richard standing there, a haunted look in his eyes. He was alone, no lawyer, no paparazzi. She hesitated, then stepped aside to let him in, aware that Charlotte was napping and wanting to avoid waking her. Richard began by apologizing, not just for the affair, but for every lie and every instance of neglect. He stood in the living room, glancing at the modest furniture and the baby toys scattered around. Gone was the towering confidence of the wealthy mogul. In its place was a man visibly humbled by life's relentless lessons. He acknowledged he had seen a therapist and realized he had been driven by ego and a fear of losing his freedom. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," he said, voice barely above a murmur. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm here because I still love my daughter and respect you enough to tell you that I'm trying to change." Ava watched him carefully, her emotions a complicated tapestry of empathy, hurt, and caution. She thought of Charlotte, asleep in her crib, innocent and oblivious to the turmoil outside. She looked at Richard, the father of her child, who stood before her in regret. In that moment, she saw both the damage he had caused and the flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, he could be a better father if he truly tried. Without a word, she led him down the hallway to Charlotte's nursery. The baby stirred awake, and Richard softly cradled her in his arms for the first time, without supervision. Tears welled in his eyes as Charlotte let out a tiny yawn, her fingers curling around his thumb. Ava stood beside him, uncertain, yet determined to prioritize her daughter's well-being above all else. Whatever lay ahead, be it partial reconciliation for Charlotte's sake or permanent estrangement. They had crossed a threshold. No longer were they trapped in a toxic cycle of deception. They were two people bound by a child and a shared history, now forced to navigate the wreckage left behind, and as Ava gently took Charlotte back into her arms, she vowed never to let betrayal and lies rule her life again. Finalizing the divorce took another 6 months, a complex dance of financial disclosures, custody agreements, and legal protocols. When the decree was finally signed, Ava felt an enormous weight lift from her shoulders. She retained full custody of Charlotte, with Richard granted scheduled visitation. The settlement ensured that Ava and Charlotte would be financially secure for life. During this period, Richard made a concerted effort to show up consistently for Charlotte, arriving on time and soberly mindful of the boundaries Ava set. It wasn't lost on him that his presence was tolerated rather than welcomed, yet he accepted it as part of the penance he had to pay for his past failings. Occasionally he tried to engage Ava in small talk, asking about her day or complimenting her on her outfit. She answered politely, but remained guarded, as rumors circulated that the board of Harrington Tech Innovations was finalizing a plan for his buyout. Richard became reflective. He attended more therapy sessions, exploring the roots of his actions and the illusions he once held about success and happiness. He even took up volunteer work at the same mental health charity Ava had championed, though he did so quietly, away from cameras, hoping to reconnect with a sense of purpose that didn't revolve around wealth or image. Meanwhile, Ava's life blossomed in unexpected ways. She reconnected with her passion for interior design, taking on freelance projects that allowed her to work from home. She arranged nursery makeovers and consulted for young families seeking comfortable child-friendly spaces. Word-of-mouth referrals grew quickly, and soon she found herself turning down projects to balance her schedule with single motherhood. Friends old and new rallied around Ava. She discovered the depth of human kindness in the wake of betrayal. Women confided their own stories of heartbreak and marital strife, looking to her as a figure of resilience. Moved by their stories, Ava organized a small support group that met weekly at a local community center. She shared her journey and listened to others, creating a circle of trust and empathy that began to heal more than just her own wounds. Occasionally, the media tried to resurrect the scandal, particularly whenever Camilla posted a new cryptic message online or took a jab at Richard, but the public had mostly moved on, leaving the trio to continue their lives with a semblance of privacy. As the seasons changed, so did the emotional climate between Ava and Richard. They were no longer adversaries locked in legal combat. Instead, they had become co-parents, cautiously learning to trust each other in small increments for Charlotte's sake. One breezy autumn day, after a scheduled visit at the park, Richard lingered watching Charlotte play with fallen leaves. The crisp scent of pine filled the air as a gentle wind rustled the branches above them. Ava stood a few feet away, arms folded. She caught Richard's gaze, and for a moment the past flickered between them, a memory of who they once were. Then they both turned their attention back to Charlotte, who squealed in delight as she tossed leaves into the air. A faint smile appeared on Ava's lips, and something akin to gratitude glimmered in Richard's eyes. Perhaps redemption was too strong a word for what Richard sought. The wounds of betrayal and heartbreak were deep, and scars remained. But in that moment, there was at least a fragile peace, a shared acceptance that life must go on. The path ahead would never be the fairy tale they once pretended to have, but it could still be a story of resilience, growth and a better future for their daughter. Ava left the park that day, with Charlotte in her arms, the cool wind gently sweeping through her hair. As she buckled Charlotte into the car seat, her heart felt lighter than it had in a long time. She glanced at Richard standing near the park gates, and she recognized in him the once proud man, now humbled, who realized too late that no one is immune to consequences. She wished him well, not out of love, but out of a desire to move forward, without bitterness. And with that choice, Ava Harrington closed the darkest chapter of her life, ready to embrace whatever came next, with courage and an unshakable belief in her own worth. Thank you for staying with us through this gripping tale of heartbreak, betrayal, and ultimate transformation. Ava Harrington's journey reminds us that even in our darkest moments, we can rise above the pain and reclaim our lives with dignity, determination, and the fierce desire to protect what truly matters. Sometimes karma is swift and ruthless, just as it was for Richard, who learned the hard way that actions always carry consequences. But amid the fallout, hope can still emerge, lighting the path to a new beginning. We hope this story has moved, you resonated with you, or offered insight into the power of resilience. If you found it compelling, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us bring you more stories that delve into the raw emotions of real-life drama, inspiration, and the indomitable human spirit. Stay tuned for our next riveting tale.
What happens when the man who threw you away is forced to watch you become everything he ever wanted to be? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of Damien Vance, a man who paraded his new life like a trophy, convinced he'd discarded a worthless trinket. He publicly humiliated his ex-wife, Caroline Abbott, believing she was nothing without him. But he made one fatal mistake: he never bothered to look at what she was truly capable of. He was so busy celebrating his victory, he never saw the tidal wave of her ambition gathering strength right under his nose. Get ready, because you are about to witness the moment his entire world didn't just crumble, it was spectacularly obliterated by the one person he thought he had already destroyed. The divorce papers felt like sheets of ice in Caroline Abbott's hands, the sharp legalistic font a stark contrast to the soft, rounded life she had painstakingly built. Their lawyer, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than her first car, slid them across the polished mahogany table of Damien's home office. His office. It had once been their study, a shared space where she'd helped him prep for his bar exam late into the night, armed with flashcards and endless cups of coffee. Now it was his domain, a monument to his success, decorated with abstract art. She loathed and framed accolades that only told half the story. "It's a very generous offer," Caroline Damien said, his voice laced with the patronizing calm he used when explaining things he assumed were beyond her comprehension. He leaned back in his leather chair, a king surveying his conquered territory. "More than generous, in fact. My legal team thinks I'm insane." Caroline looked at the figure. It was on the surface a substantial sum. Enough to buy a comfortable new life, enough to silence any accusations of cruelty. But it was a calculated generosity. It was severance pay. It was the price of her silence, the cost of her quiet disappearance from his ascendant life. It was a golden cage designed to keep her comfortable, but contained forever a footnote in the grand story of Damien Vance. "It's not about the money, Damien," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at his face, searching for a flicker of the man she had married, the ambitious but kind boy she'd met in college. There was none. His features, once handsome and open, had hardened with success, his eyes holding the flat, predatory sheen of a shark. "Oh, please," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's always about the money. Don't try to take the moral high ground now. It doesn't suit you." The real issue wasn't on the papers. The real issue was currently redecorating their master bedroom and posting about it on Instagram. Jenna Reed, a 20-something marketing coordinator from his firm with bright eyes, a rapacious ambition that mirrored his own, and a complete lack of shame. Caroline had discovered their affair not through a clandestine phone call or a lipstick-stained collar, but through the cold, impersonal evidence of a credit card statement. A charge for a suite at the St. Regis on a night he was supposedly on a business trip to Chicago. A boutique receipt for lingerie in a size she had never worn. When she confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to lie. He'd simply looked at her, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if she were a household appliance that had inconveniently malfunctioned. "We've grown apart, Caroline," he'd said, the ultimate cliché falling from his lips with unnerving sincerity. "I need someone who understands my world, who can keep up. Jenna. She gets it. She gets me." What he meant was that Jenna was an accessory, a beautiful, compliant ornament that reflected his own success back at him. Caroline, with her quiet intelligence and her mid-level analyst job at Sterling Thorne Capital, was a relic of his past. She was the starter wife. The supportive behind-the-scenes woman who had edited his essays, managed their home, and sacrificed her own career ambitions so he could chase his. He had reached the summit and decided the climbing partner who helped him get there was now dead weight. Now in the office he tapped an impatient finger on the table. "Just sign it, Caroline. Let's not drag this out. It's for the best." She picked up the expensive fountain pen he'd offered. Its weight felt obscene in her hand. For a decade her signature had been intertwined with his on mortgages, on tax returns, on holiday cards. This would be the last time. As the nib scratched across the paper, she felt a profound and hollow ache. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the erasure of a life. She had poured herself into the vessel of their relationship, and now that it was shattered, she wasn't sure what, if anything, was left of her own form. He smiled a tight, triumphant curl of his lips. "Good. That's settled." He stood up, smoothing down his tie. "The movers will be here on Friday. I'd appreciate it if you could have your personal effects packed by then. Jenna is keen to refresh the decor." The casual cruelty of it was a physical blow. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was evicting her from her own memories. He watched her, expecting tears, a scene, a final pathetic plea. But Caroline felt something else crystallizing in the pit of her stomach, something cold and hard and sharp. It was a nascent form of rage, too exhausted to be fiery, but dense as a diamond. She stood her back straight and placed the pen neatly beside the signed documents. She didn't look at him. She looked at the city skyline visible through the large window behind him, a panorama of power and ambition. His view. "You're right, Damien," she said, her voice suddenly clear and steady. "This is for the best." She walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of the life that had been her entire world. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Behind her, the door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a final definitive judgment. The weeks that followed the signing were a masterclass in public humiliation. Damien and Jenna seemed to be on a mission to scorch the earth of Caroline's old life, salting it with their new, vibrant happiness. Their relationship wasn't just public. It was a curated, relentless social media campaign. There was Jenna wearing a bikini on the balcony of their old vacation condo in Miami, captioning it "Paradise with My King." There was Damien grinning at a Michelin star restaurant they had been on a waiting list for months, with Jenna's hand adorned with a new ostentatious ring resting on his. They systematically colonized every memory, every special place. The small Italian bistro where he had proposed, they were there clinking champagne glasses in an Instagram story. The park where they used to walk their golden retriever, a new post of them with a fluffy designer puppy, hashtagged "New Beginnings." It was psychological warfare, and Caroline was the sole target. Her friends, particularly her closest confidant Olivia, were furious on her behalf. "He's a monster, Caroline. A narcissistic ghoul. You need to block him. Block her. Block everyone who even knows them." Caroline tried. She deactivated her accounts, but the images still found their way to her through well-meaning but clumsy friends who would say things like, "You'll never believe what that pig posted now." Each new picture was a fresh stab, a reminder of her replacement. She felt like a ghost haunting the periphery of a life that was once hers, watching someone else live it louder, brighter, and seemingly better. She moved into a small, sterile apartment across town. The silence was deafening. The generous settlement felt like blood money, and she tried to spend as little of it as possible, as if to do so would be to accept his narrative that she was bought and paid for. She threw herself into her work at Sterling Thorne Capital, a massive investment firm, where her role as a senior financial analyst had always been a quiet background hum to Damien's bombastic legal career. The complex algorithms and market trend analyses were a welcome refuge. In the clean, logical world of numbers, there was no room for heartbreak. There was only data patterns and outcomes. The true nadir, the moment of absolute soul-crushing humiliation, came 2 months later. It was the annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, the premier philanthropic event of the city's elite. For years, she and Damien had attended together. She'd spent weeks choosing a dress, and he would charm the room, a formidable power couple. This year, her invitation, addressed solely to Ms. Caroline Abbott, had sat on her counter for a week before Olivia had bullied her into going. "You cannot let him win," Olivia had insisted, zipping up the back of Caroline's simple but elegant navy blue gown. "You cannot let him think he has successfully erased you from this city. Hold your head high and let him see that you are fine." But she wasn't fine. The moment she walked into the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, she felt a crippling wave of social anxiety. The cavernous space, dripping with crystals and smelling of lilies and wealth, was a landscape of her old life. Faces turned, conversations paused, and she could feel the pitying glances and whispered gossip like a physical touch. And then she saw them. Damien stood near the champagne fountain, looking impossibly handsome in a custom tuxedo. On his arm was Jenna, poured into a sequined fire-engine red dress that was designed to command attention. They were laughing, holding court, the gravitational center of the room. As if sensing her presence, Damien's eyes scanned the crowd and landed directly on her. For a heartbeat, his smile faltered, but it was quickly replaced by a smirk of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He saw her standing alone, a solitary figure in a sea of couples, and he saw an opportunity. Taking Jenna's hand, he began to walk towards her, parting the crowd like a shark gliding through water. Caroline's blood ran cold. She wanted to turn, to flee, to disappear into the floorboards, but her feet were rooted to the spot, trapped by the tractor beam of his ego. "Caroline, I'm so surprised to see you out," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The implication was clear. "I thought you'd be at home crying into a pint of ice cream." He gestured to the woman on his arm. "You know my partner, Jenna Reed, of course." Jenna gave her a small, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a victor's smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you properly," she said, her voice sweet as poison. The small crowd around them had fallen into a voyeuristic silence. It was a car crash, and no one could look away. A portly man named Mr. Harrington, a senior partner at a rival law firm, clapped Damien on the back. "Vance, you dog," he chortled. "Always trading up." Damien beamed, soaking in the crude compliment. And then he delivered the killing blow. He looked at Caroline, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph, and said to Mr. Harrington, "This is my ex-wife, Caroline. She's an analyst over at Sterling Thorne. A very dedicated employee. Always good with the numbers." The condescension was suffocating. He had reduced her entire identity to a bland corporate descriptor, positioning her as the sensible, boring brown wren next to his vibrant bird of paradise. He was publicly framing their history, casting himself as the dynamic man who had outgrown his quiet, uninteresting wife. In that moment, under the blaze of the chandeliers, something inside Caroline snapped. The grief and the hurt that had been churning within her for months suddenly cooled, hardened and sharpened into a single lethal point. It was the humiliation that did it. The sheer, unvarnished cruelty of his need to not just win, but to see her utterly defeated. She looked at him, at his smug face, at Jenna's triumphant smirk, at the curious, pitying eyes of the onlookers. And she felt no more pain. The emotional connection, the last lingering thread of the love she'd once had for him, was finally irrevocably severed. All that remained was a vast, cold emptiness, and in the center of that void, a single burning ember of resolve. She gave him a smile. It was a small, tight, unreadable thing. "It was a pleasure seeing you both," she said, her voice as even as a frozen lake. "Do enjoy your evening." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her spine as straight as a steel rod. She didn't run. She didn't falter. She walked through the crowd past the pitying stares and out of the ballroom. She didn't stop until she was outside in the cool night air. She didn't cry. The time for tears was over. He had wanted to see her break. Instead, he had just witnessed her being forged. The gala was a baptism by fire. Caroline walked away from that night a different woman. The part of her that had hoped for reconciliation, that had grieved the loss of her marriage, was gone, cauterized by the heat of public humiliation. In its place was a quiet, relentless focus. Damien had defined her by her job, so her job would become her salvation. She arrived at the Sterling Thorne Capital offices before the sun rose and left long after it had set. Her small gray cubicle became her sanctuary and her command center. She channeled all her pain, anger, and grief into her work, transforming raw emotion into fuel. Her colleagues, used to the competent but reserved Caroline, began to notice a change. Her contributions in meetings became sharper, her analyses more incisive. She wasn't just processing data anymore. She was interrogating it, forcing it to reveal secrets and opportunities others had missed. Her focus narrowed onto a project that had been languishing in development for months. Project Chimera. It was an ambitious, high-risk proposal to restructure the firm's portfolio by divesting from traditional stable assets and aggressively acquiring stakes in emerging fintech and sustainable energy startups. The current CEO, a risk-averse man named Robert Morrison, who was nearing retirement, had all but shelved it, deeming it too radical. Most analysts agreed, seeing it as a career killer. But Caroline saw potential. She spent her nights and weekends tearing Chimera apart and rebuilding it. She ran thousands of simulations, stress-tested every variable, and built complex models that forecasted not just potential profits, but entire market shifts. She found the fatal flaw in the original proposal: it was too broad. She refined it, identifying a specific, undervalued niche in the green tech sector that was poised for explosive growth. It was a surgical strike, not a blitzkrieg. Her work did not go unnoticed. Alistair Finch, a semi-retired board member who still kept an office on the executive floor, was a quiet legend at the firm. He was a kingmaker known for his uncanny ability to spot talent. He had a habit of wandering the lower floors after hours, a ghost in a bespoke suit. One evening he saw the light on in Caroline's cubicle. He stood silently in the doorway for a moment, watching her. Her face was illuminated by the glow of 3 monitors, each displaying a dizzying array of charts and code. She was utterly absorbed, her focus absolute. "Burning the midnight oil, Mrs. Abbott?" he asked, his voice a gentle, gravelly rumble. Caroline jumped, startled. "Mr. Finch, I'm sorry I didn't see you. It's Caroline, isn't it? Please call me Alistair." He gestured toward her screen. "What has your undivided attention?" Hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence, she explained her work on Project Chimera. She didn't just show him the numbers. She told him the story they were telling her. She spoke of market trends, regulatory tailwinds, and the shifting paradigms of global investment. She spoke with a passion and clarity that he hadn't heard from anyone at the firm in years. Alistair listened, his expression unreadable. He asked a few sharp, probing questions which she answered without hesitation, backing up every assertion with data. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "Very impressive, Caroline," he said. "Very impressive indeed. You see the whole chessboard, not just the next move. That's a rare quality." He gave her a small, enigmatic smile. "Send me your revised proposal. I'd like to read it." That single conversation was the spark. Alistair became her silent champion. He never offered her overt help, but doors began to open. She was invited to meetings that were previously above her pay grade. Her reports, which once would have been buried under a mountain of paperwork, started landing on the desks of division heads. She was given a small team and a modest budget to develop a pilot program based on her Chimera revisions. It was a test. The firm gave her just enough rope to either hang herself or weave a ladder. She and her team worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. They identified a small, struggling solar panel company with brilliant proprietary technology but poor management. Using her model, Caroline structured a deal for a minority stake acquisition that also included placing 2 of Sterling Thorne's operational experts on their board. Within 6 months, the company's stock had tripled. The success of the pilot program sent ripples through the company. Caroline was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development. She was given a corner office, not as grand as Damien's, but with a view that was all her own. She was no longer Caroline Abbott, the quiet analyst. She was a rising star, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and curiosity in the hallways of Sterling Thorne. She never spoke of her personal life at work. Her divorce, Damien, the humiliation, she buried it all. Her past was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the future she was building, one successful trade, one brilliant forecast at a time. She was no longer just surviving, she was thriving. The woman who had left Damien's house feeling erased was now authoring a new story, and it was a story written in the bold, unforgiving language of power and success. While Caroline was ascending, Sterling Thorne Capital was beginning to falter. The firm, once a titan of Wall Street, was stagnating. Its conservative strategies, championed by CEO Robert Morrison, were failing to keep pace with a rapidly changing financial landscape. Profits were down for the 3rd consecutive quarter. Restless investors were grumbling, and the board was growing increasingly anxious. The whispers about Morrison's imminent retirement grew from a murmur to a roar. The hunt for a successor was on. The boardroom on the 50th floor was a place of immense power, paneled in dark wood and smelling of old money and new fear. The list of potential CEO candidates was short and predictable. There was David Chen, the aggressive head of the Asian Markets Division, known for his ruthlessness. There was Robert's own hand-picked protege, William Davenport, a company man who represented the safe, uninspired status quo. The board was split. A faction terrified of further losses favored the stability of Davenport. Another, hungry for a return to market dominance, backed Chen's high-risk, high-reward approach. The meetings were tense, deadlocked affairs. It was in one of these stalemates that Alistair Finch finally played his hand. "Gentlemen," he began, his calm voice cutting through the fractious debate. "We are looking at this problem all wrong. We are debating between the fire and the frying pan. One will burn us quickly, the other slowly. Neither will save us." The other board members looked at him intrigued. Alistair rarely spoke at length, but when he did, everyone listened. "We don't need a continuation of the old ways, and we don't need reckless gambling. We need a visionary. We need someone who understands the future because they are already building it. We have that person right here in this building." A few eyebrows were raised. William Davenport shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I am talking," Alistair continued, letting the suspense build about Caroline Abbott. The name was met with a moment of stunned silence, followed by a wave of dismissive murmurs. Abbott scoffed, a portly board member named Peterson. "The new VP. She's been in management for less than a year. She's a glorified analyst." "She's brilliant," Alistair countered, his voice firm. Her revised Chimera strategy single-handedly created the only profitable new revenue stream this firm has seen in 2 years. Her pilot program yielded a 300% return in 6 months. Her projections on the European carbon credit market were dismissed by all of you as overly optimistic, and they have since been proven to be conservative. She sees things we do not. "She has no leadership experience on this scale," another argued. "The markets will see her as a lightweight. Our stock will plummet. The markets see us as a dinosaur." Alistair retorted, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Appointing someone like Davenport signals we are afraid. Appointing Chen signals we are desperate. Appointing Abbott, that signals we are smart. It signals a fundamental shift. It is a bold strategic move that will electrify the industry." He projected Caroline's performance metrics onto the main screen. The numbers spoke for themselves. Growth, profit, and predictive accuracy that dwarfed every other division in the firm. He followed it with her detailed 5-year plan for Sterling Thorne, a document he had asked her to prepare weeks ago under the guise of a thought exercise. It was a masterpiece of strategic planning, bold, innovative, and meticulously researched. The room fell silent again, the dismissiveness replaced by a grudging curiosity. Alistair had planted a seed of doubt in their convictions. Caroline Abbott, the dark horse, the complete unknown, was suddenly a viable if terrifying option. The debate raged for days. Alistair lobbied tirelessly behind the scenes, having quiet dinners and phone calls appealing to the board members' greed and their fear in equal measure. He framed Caroline as the only person who could navigate the treacherous waters ahead. He was selling them not just a new CEO, but a new identity for the firm. Caroline knew nothing of this. She was consumed with expanding her division, unaware that her name was the subject of the most high-stakes debate in the company's recent history. She was called into a final formal interview with the full board, which she assumed was a formality for a more senior executive role. She walked into the imposing boardroom calm and prepared. They grilled her for 2 hours. They attacked her strategies, questioned her experience, and challenged her vision. They were testing her, looking for any sign of weakness. She met every challenge with poise and irrefutable logic. She never raised her voice, never became defensive. She simply laid out her plan, her data, and her unshakable belief in the future she had mapped out. When she walked out, she was convinced she had failed. The board had been hostile, their questions bordering on accusatory. She went back to her office, a knot of disappointment in her stomach, and buried herself in her work. Up on the 50th floor, the moment she left, Alistair Finch looked around the table. "Well, gentlemen," Peterson, the man who had dismissed her as a glorified analyst, slowly leaned back in his chair. "My God," he breathed. "She's a killer. She's been hiding it behind a spreadsheet." The vote was taken an hour later. It was nearly unanimous. The age of Robert Morrison was over. The era of Caroline Abbott was about to begin. The announcement was scheduled for the following Monday at a firm-wide town hall meeting. An email sent out the Friday before had been intentionally vague, speaking of a major strategic announcement regarding the future leadership of Sterling Thorne Capital. The news of Robert Morrison's retirement had already been leaked to the press, and the speculation about his successor was rampant on Wall Street. The smart money was on William Davenport. The atmosphere in the massive sunlit atrium was electric. Hundreds of employees were packed in, from junior traders to senior partners. A stage had been set up, and a legion of financial journalists and photographers were corralled into a press area, their cameras poised. Damian Vance was there. Sterling Thorne was a key client for his law firm, and his presence was a required bit of networking, a public display of his firm's close relationship with the financial giant. He stood near the front with a few of his colleagues, looking smug and relaxed. Jenna was with him, clinging to his arm, looking slightly bored but enjoying the spectacle of power. For Damian, this was just another day at the office, schmoozing, being seen, and reinforcing his place in the city's power structure. He scanned the crowd idly. He spotted Caroline standing off to the side near the back with her small team. He nudged his colleague Gregory. "See that woman over there? The one in the gray suit," he said with a condescending chuckle. "That's my ex-Caroline, still plugging away. Good for her. At least the alimony is going to a dedicated employee." Gregory grunted, more interested in the free coffee. Damian felt a familiar flicker of satisfaction. Seeing her there, just another face in the corporate crowd, validated his decision to leave her. She was a cog in the machine. He was a master of the universe. Their orbits were, and always would be, galaxies apart. A hush fell over the room as Alistair Finch, in his capacity as interim chairman of the board, walked to the podium. "Good morning, everyone," Alistair began, his voice resonating through the atrium. "We are here today at a pivotal moment for Sterling Thorne. As you know, Robert Morrison is stepping down after a long and distinguished career. The board has undergone an exhaustive search for a new leader. We sought not just a manager, but a visionary. Not just a successor, but a revolutionary." Damian stifled a yawn. He already had a congratulatory text message drafted for Davenport. We needed a leader with an unparalleled understanding of market dynamics, a relentless drive for innovation, and the courage to steer this great firm into the future. Alistair continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. We found that leader. It is my distinct honor and profound pleasure to introduce you to the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Thorne Capital. Damien straightened his tie, ready to applaud. Jenna was already looking toward William Davenport, who was sitting in the front row, a self-satisfied smile on his face. Ms. Caroline Abbott. The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second, a sonic boom that preceded the shockwave. A collective audible gasp rippled through the atrium. For a moment there was complete stunned silence. Damien's brain failed to process the words. It was as if he'd heard a foreign language. Caroline Abbott. It had to be a mistake. A different Caroline Abbott. He looked wildly toward where he'd seen her, but she was no longer there. Then from the side of the stage she emerged. She was not the hesitant, heartbroken woman he had divorced. She was not the quiet analyst he had just mocked. The woman who walked to the podium was radiating a calm, formidable authority. Her simple gray suit now looked like armor. Her posture was perfect, her expression serene but unyielding. She moved with a purpose that seemed to command the very air around her. The stunned silence erupted into a cacophony. The camera flashes began to fire a storm of strobing lights, all aimed at her. The journalists were shouting, scrambling. The employees were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning excitement. Damien stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion and denial. CEO, CEO. The word echoed in his skull. Little, quiet, sensible Caroline. The woman he had patronized, belittled, and discarded. The woman he had condescendingly called a dedicated employee, not 5 minutes ago. He looked at her on the stage as she shook Alistair's hand. The power dynamic of the universe had just fundamentally, grotesquely shifted. She wasn't just a cog anymore. She was the entire machine. He wasn't a master of the universe. He was a lawyer whose firm was a vendor to the company she now ran. He was in an instant utterly insignificant. Jenna tugged on his arm. Damien, isn't that? Her voice was thin, confused. Damien couldn't answer. A cold dread heavier and more profound than anything he had ever felt was creeping up his spine, wrapping itself around his heart. The smirk was gone from his face, replaced by a pallor of sheer, unadulterated shock. The world had just turned upside down, and he was on the bottom looking up at the woman he had so gleefully tried to crush under his heel. He was watching his past rise up and become his future, and he was terrified. The aftermath was a brutal, slow-motion demolition of Damien's world. The news of Caroline's appointment exploded across the financial world. It was the story of the year, the unforeseen queen of Sterling Thorne. From analyst to CEO, the meteoric rise of Caroline Abbott. Her face was on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. She was hailed as a genius, a visionary, the fresh blood that a sclerotic Wall Street desperately needed. And in every article in the fine print of her biography was the inevitable damning detail: Ms. Abbott is the former wife of prominent attorney Damien Vance. His name, once his greatest source of pride, was now forever linked to hers, but as a footnote. He was no longer the star of his own story. He was a supporting character in hers. The schadenfreude at his law firm was thick and palpable. His colleagues, who had once envied his success and his beautiful new partner, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contemptuous amusement. Gregory, the man he had mocked Caroline to, now avoided his gaze. Whispers followed him down the hallways. Jokes were made at his expense over lunch, just quiet enough for him to not be able to confront anyone. Can you imagine he overheard one junior associate say by the coffee machine? He divorced her, and now she's one of the most powerful women in the country. He must be kicking himself so hard he can taste his own shoe leather. His clients, men and women who prized power and perception above all else, began to treat him differently. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a subtle, clinical distance. They saw him not as a peer, but as a man who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had held a winning lottery ticket in his hand and had thrown it away because he thought it was just a piece of paper. If his judgment was that poor in his personal life, how could it be trusted in their multi-million-dollar legal affairs? Jenna was the first true crack in his crumbling facade. The foundation of her attraction to Damien had been his power, his status, his unshakable confidence. But that man was gone. In his place was a shell-shocked, irritable, and increasingly desperate man. He was consumed by Caroline's success, obsessively reading every article about her, muttering to himself about how she could have possibly done it. It must have been Finch he'd rant pacing their pristine white apartment. She could never have done this on her own. She manipulated him. She must have. Jenna, who had once hung on his every word, now looked at him with a clinical detachment. The powerful king she had admired had been dethroned, and his replacement was a bitter, resentful man. The allure was gone. The red dress from the gala now seemed garish. The Miami vacation pictures pathetic. She started spending more time out with her own friends, her replies to his texts becoming shorter and less frequent. The final humiliating confrontation came 2 weeks after the announcement. Driven by a toxic cocktail of rage and wounded pride, Damien managed to get past Caroline's new phalanx of executive assistants and corner her in the hallway outside her new cavernous office. "Caroline," he called out, his voice sharp. She turned. She wasn't wearing the gray suit of the announcement, but a chic-tailored black dress that spoke of effortless authority. She looked at him not with anger or pity or even triumph, but with a cool, professional indifference. It was the look one might give a junior vendor who had shown up unannounced. "Damien," she said, her tone level, "you should have made an appointment." "An appointment?" He sputtered, incredulous. "I don't need an appointment to talk to you. We were married for 10 years. "Yes, we were," she replied calmly. "And now we are not. If this is a personal matter, I'm afraid I'm very busy. If this is a professional matter concerning your firm's business with Sterling Thorne, please direct your inquiries to our head of legal." Her dismissal cut him deeper than any insult could have. She was placing him in a box, categorizing him, handling him. He was just another problem to be delegated. "Don't you dare do this, Caroline," he hissed, stepping closer. "Don't you dare pretend you did this all on your own. You think I don't know what this is? This is about me. This is all some pathetic revenge fantasy." Caroline looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was a distant, almost academic curiosity. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "You think the world revolves around you, that my successes and failures are all just a reaction to you. The most motivating thing you ever did for me, Damien, was showing me exactly who you were that night at the gala. You revealed that my marriage was a lie and that I had been dedicating my life to a man of hollow character. So I decided to dedicate my life to something real instead, to myself, to my work." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This was never about you. You were just the catalyst. You were the dead weight I had to cut loose before I could finally start to climb." With that, she turned and walked into her office, the large wooden doors closing softly but definitively behind her. Damien stood alone in the hallway, the echo of her words ringing in his ears. Dead weight. The term he had privately used for her was now being thrown back in his face. In that moment, the last vestiges of his arrogance shattered, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth. He hadn't traded up. He had been the one holding her back. His entire identity, built on the belief in his own superiority, was a fraud. He was nothing. And she, the woman he had thrown away, was everything. The reign of Caroline Abbott at Sterling Thorne Capital was nothing short of transformative. She moved with a speed and decisiveness that left the old guard breathless. Project Chimera was fully funded and implemented, diversifying the firm's portfolio and yielding staggering returns. She poached top talent from rival firms, brilliant minds who were drawn to her vision and her calm, data-driven leadership. She wasn't a screamer or a tyrant. Her authority was absolute precisely because it was quiet. She commanded loyalty, not through fear, but through sheer, undeniable competence. The stock price, which the board had feared would plummet, soared to historic highs. Caroline, the person, remained an enigma to the public. She rarely gave interviews, and when she did, she spoke only of the firm's strategy and its future. She deflected all questions about her personal life and her ex-husband with an icy grace that discouraged repetition. Her private life remained just that private. She had her small circle of trusted friends like Olivia and her work. For now, that was enough. She was no longer healing, she was whole. Damien's downfall, in contrast, was a slow public spectacle. A few months after their hallway confrontation, he lost his biggest client, a tech billionaire, who explicitly moved his accounts to Sterling Thorne, requesting a personal consultation with the firm's new CEO. The message was clear. The loss was a major blow to Damien's firm and a fatal one to his career there. He was quietly pushed out, allowed to resign to pursue other opportunities, the corporate euphemism for being fired. The same week, he came home to their apartment to find Jenna's closets empty. A single note was left on the marble countertop. "I'm sorry, Dee. This isn't working. I need to be with someone who is going somewhere." A month later, her Instagram featured a new man, a silver-haired European shipping magnate. She had found her new king. Damien was adrift. His reputation was in tatters, his relationship was over, and the wealth he had fought so ruthlessly for was beginning to dwindle. He sold the large house he had once shared with Caroline, a painful admission of his diminished status. He was a ghost in a city that had once been his kingdom, haunted by the specter of his ex-wife's success. He would see her face on magazine covers at the newsstand or hear her name mentioned with reverence on financial news networks, and each time it was like a fresh turn of the knife. One crisp autumn evening, a year after she had taken the helm, Caroline stood in her office looking out at the glittering expanse of the city skyline. It was the same view Damien had once lorded over her, but it looked different from this height, from this perspective. It wasn't a symbol of conquest. It was a map of possibilities. Her assistant buzzed. "Ms. Abbott, your car is ready." "Thank you, I'll be down in a moment," she replied. Before leaving, she glanced at her desk. Beside a stack of market reports lay an invitation. It was to the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala. This year she was the event's honorary chair. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time that day. She thought of Damien not with anger or bitterness, but with a strange detached sense of pity. He had been so desperate to prove his worth to the world that he had never bothered to cultivate any within himself. His life had been a performance, and without an audience he had simply ceased to exist. Her success wasn't the revenge she had sought. It was the life she had earned. The humiliation at that gala a lifetime ago had felt like an ending, but it had been a violent, necessary beginning. It had burned away the life she thought she wanted, revealing the far more extraordinary one she was capable of building. She switched off the light, leaving the city lights to illuminate her office. As she walked toward the elevator, she didn't look back. Her gaze was fixed firmly on the future, a future she was building not in reaction to anyone else, but entirely magnificently on her own terms. The shattered pieces of her old life were long gone, replaced by the unshakable foundation of a new reign. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was a universe of its own, a swirling galaxy of champagne flutes, diamond earrings, and calculated smiles. A year ago, Caroline had entered this room and felt its gravity threaten to crush her. She had been a ghost, a loose thread in a tapestry she was no longer part of. Tonight she was the sun, and the entire room orbited her. As the honorary chair of the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, she had spent the first hour graciously navigating a sea of admirers. People who had once offered her looks of pity now grasped her hand with reverent enthusiasm. They didn't just want to be seen with her, they wanted to absorb some of the Midas touch aura that now surrounded her. Sterling Thorne's unprecedented success under her leadership had become the stuff of legend on Wall Street, and its CEO was treated with the deference once reserved for royalty. She saw Mr. Harrington, the portly lawyer, who had so crudely congratulated Damien on trading up. He practically scuttled towards her, his face flushed with champagne and sycophantic zeal. "Ms. Abbott Caroline." "A triumph," he boomed, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room as if she were responsible for its very existence. "What you've done with Sterling Thorne is simply magnificent. A true visionary. I always knew you had it in you. Always." Caroline offered him a serene, impenetrable smile. "Thank you for your support of the hospital, Mr. Harrington. Every contribution makes a difference." She gracefully disengaged before he could continue his revisionist history, moving towards the main stage where Alistair Finch and Olivia were waiting for her. "Holding up okay?" Olivia asked, her eyes sparkling. She looked radiant in an emerald green dress, a stark contrast to the somber navy she had worn the year before, as if mirroring Caroline's own transformation. "I'm fine," Caroline said, and she meant it. The fawning wasn't satisfying, but it wasn't irritating either. It was simply data. A reflection of her changed status in this ecosystem. It's just noise. "Well, the noise has raised over $5 million tonight, largely because your name is on the invitation," Alistair noted with a proud smile. "Now are you ready for your speech?" She nodded, took a deep breath, and walked to the podium as the room fell into a respectful hush. The glare of the spotlights was warm and intense, momentarily blinding her to the hundreds of faces in the darkness. She began to speak. Her speech wasn't about finance or corporate strategy. It was about potential. She spoke of the children in the hospital, tiny fighters, who with the right care and the right chances could grow up to change the world. She spoke of the importance of seeing value where others see only risk, of investing in futures that aren't yet obvious. She never mentioned her own story, but the subtext was unmistakable. It was a speech about second chances, about resilience, about the quiet strength that blossoms in the wake of devastation. As she reached her closing remarks, her eyes, now adjusted to the light, scanned the vast room. And that's when she saw him. He was standing near the back by a service entrance, half shrouded in shadow. It was Damien. He looked thin, his expensive suit hanging slightly off his frame as if it belonged to a larger, more confident man. He wasn't with anyone. He was utterly alone, a solitary island in the festive sea. She learned later he had come as the guest of a junior lawyer from a third-tier firm, a desperate attempt to cling to the periphery of the world he had once commanded. For a long, silent moment their eyes locked across the expanse of the ballroom. He saw her at the podium, bathed in golden light, holding the attention of the city's most powerful people in the palm of her hand. She was the architect of her own universe, eloquent, powerful, and serene. She saw him in the shadows, a ghost at a feast. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. In his eyes, she saw the full, devastating calculus of his loss. He wasn't just looking at his ex-wife. He was looking at the living embodiment of his life's greatest mistake. He was staring into the abyss that separated what he had thrown away from what he was now. The room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. The applause washed over Caroline, but for that one instant the only sound was the silent, shattering acknowledgement in Damien's eyes. There was no triumph in her heart, no sweet taste of revenge. There was only a profound quiet and final sense of closure. She felt a brief pang of pity for the small man he had become, for the potential he had squandered in his pursuit of a shallow reflection in a younger woman's eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of forgiveness, but of dismissal, an acknowledgement of a past that no longer had any power over her. Then she turned away, smiling at the cheering crowd, at Alistair, at Olivia. She turned back to her life. Later, as she was leaving the gala, a cool night breeze, a welcome relief. Alistair walked beside her. "You have a rare gift, Caroline," he said, his voice soft. "You've achieved a level of success that would make most people cruel or vain. Yet you seem to have only become more yourself." "I just learned what was worth fighting for," she replied, looking up at the clear, star-filled sky. "It was never about winning against him. It was about building something for me." Her car pulled up to the curb. She wasn't going back to a small empty apartment this time, but to a home she had designed, a space filled with light art she loved and quiet contentment. The past was a closed book, its lessons learned. Her story was no longer a reaction to its painful first chapters. It was a tale of her own making, and the best parts she knew were still to be written. And that's the story of how one woman's darkest moment became the catalyst for her greatest triumph. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Caroline didn't set out for revenge, but by focusing on her own growth and talent, she achieved the ultimate victory, a life so successful that her toxic past became completely irrelevant. Damien's world shattered not because she attacked it, but because it was built on a foundation of ego and cruelty, and it simply couldn't withstand the weight of her incredible success. What did you think of Caroline's journey? Could you feel the chill in the boardroom when her name was announced? If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of resilience and second chances, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that the end of one chapter is often the beginning of a much better one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of justice and unexpected triumph.